All right, howdy everyone. Welcome to the next edition of our CDS video series. I'm Steve Spillett, President of CDS Community Development Strategies.
I'm Todd Jacobson, Senior Market and GIS Analyst and Project Manager here at CDS.
I'm Mike Pratt, Senior Market Analyst and Project Manager at CDS.
So today we're revisiting a topic we've done a video about before. That topic or land use is housing. And unless you've been living under a rock, you know that housing has really bloomed into a major issue at the local, state, and even national level. And there's a real focus on the affordability crisis and the housing availability crisis in this country. And it's spread from our expensive coastal areas all the way even to places known for affordable housing like Texas. So what we're going to talk about today is, from the developer's perspective, how they're trying to address demand for housing and looking at different ways of keeping housing affordable and also adjusting for the evolution of household characteristics of the folks that are consuming housing in this country. And one thing that I just want to note, we've been doing some work that involves examining household trends in a particular part of the Houston metro, and we've noticed that there's a lot of growth. In fact, the majority of growth and the majority of households are in 1- and 2-person households in this particular part of the metro, and I think that's typical of really across the board in most places. That's what we're seeing, the focus of overall household growth. And I'm curious if the guys have comments about how those households are being addressed, or how ways that developers are trying to look at addressing smaller households and those that maybe don't want to spend as much for a family size, quote unquote, house or even rentals. Y'all can jump in wherever you want.
Well, I think when we talk about household size, we talk about the nature of households and where this development is occurring here in Houston and across the nation, that yes, 1- and 2-person households are becoming more common. It's an increased share of households in general. We typically figured that folks in these situations, particularly 1-person households, but 1- and 2-person households both, seek out multifamily housing, seek out apartments, seek out rental housing, and of course they do. But there's an increased share of folks in these households, or households that are 1- and 2-person households, that are interested in buying a house for their own consumption, not to share with roommates or family or something like that. And I think we're starting to see some product here in Houston in the single family, or in the for sale market, perhaps is a better way to put it, that looks to address that. Condominiums, a dirty word in Houston for many years. There's a somewhat of a comeback for them in certain parts of town, but also in some of the more far-flung or suburban areas, smaller single-family or smaller, perhaps in some cases shared-wall townhome-style housing coming to these places that a decade ago or more you would not have thought that there would be any interest in that type of housing product in that type of subdivision, or perhaps even anywhere in the Houston area.
Right. Yeah, I think that's important, that what you're alluding to here is that these trends are as applicable, or even more applicable, in the suburbs as they are in the urban core. So this is something that you thought of the suburbs as being like, well, that's where families with kids live. And they do, but that's only a minority share of the households living in the suburbs. And again, we're talking about both for sale and rental products, which we've seen an expansion of in certain ways as well.
Yeah, it's hard for small developers and smaller builders to compete, I think, with larger, especially publicly traded builders, because they have the flexibility to lower their prices or buy down mortgage rates to make the financing more attractive for buyers. So it'd be interesting to see what smaller builders do, how they kind of survive this cycle. And when we come out of this cycle, I'd be interested to see how the smaller developers and smaller builders, not just single family, but multifamily as well, how they do or what they're planning on doing, or what they kind of any tricks that they can come up with to help them survive this cycle. Because with housing isn't just unaffordable because magically homes have all of a sudden become unaffordable. It's rates, right? So the rates all of a sudden went up, and now all of a sudden so many people can't afford homes. Now that's forcing these suburban places to get more denser or more smaller houses than they may have otherwise preferred or ever wanted to have in their community. But it's interesting to see how rates are now dictating, home size, because to get someone to afford the house, it's got to be so small with rates so high that, they qualify. So it's interesting that some suburbs, I think, are more aggressive, and they say they lean into it. Yeah, let's figure out, let's see how flexible we can be to get in, the type of housing that, people can afford and like, and as opposed to, oh man, the rates are so high, housing is so unaffordable, this is all we can do. So those are the kind of things that I'd be interested in seeing, as we come out of this cycle.
And I think the things you're talking about are manifesting in some little developments that we've seen that you especially see it among local and regional builders, as opposed to like the big publicly traded national builders that are able to take small infill sites or small redevelopment sites that wouldn't provide that many sort of conventional 60-foot lots, but these builders and developers are able to turn those little sites that might not be in places you would think would automate. Housing might not be the first thing that you
It may be an odd-shaped lot.
Right.
Or it may be located next to something that, a larger builder or developer might just overlook and say, oh, that's too unique of a parcel or a location for us to really fool with.
Right. It might be sandwiched between a couple sort of light industrial uses. But they're able to take those sites and turn them into small lot, single-family housing. And when you shrink the size of the lot, that's one way that these builders are able to offer new homes in a developed area that if you're doing conventional size lots, if you somehow could do it, they would be really, really expensive. So that's a way to help make housing, for sale housing usually in this case, more attainable for those households. And plus, as we said, it's not just households with kids that are living in these areas in the suburbs or wherever. There's a lot of small households. Maybe they do want a yard, but they don't need a big yard. They just need they have a dog and they need a place for their dog to go do its business, and really they don't need much else besides that. Maybe a place to sit out on a patio. And so the conventional assumptions about what housing is, including single-family housing, is in both the urban core and the suburbs has changed quite a bit.
Well, and I like that we bring up the urban core because that's both an effect, had this tremendous effect on housing transition, these new types of housing. And in Houston in particular, we've seen developers get a lot of experience building a very different type of housing in the urban core, and then that is being brought to the suburbs. We have to understand that it came to the urban core first because this demographic transition that we're talking about of smaller household sizes and an increasing share of 1- and 2-person households, that has happened in Houston and nationally. That has already happened in the urban core. That has been happening in the urban core since
the late 90s,
I
really.
mean, even before that, right? This notion at first, the thought of is it families fleeing? It's families being replaced because of the nature of living in the urban core. It's not incompatible with family life, but perhaps it's appealing to people in 1- or 2-person households or in those situations. And as the demand for those types of households grows, people who have experience with those types of development, can bring that type of product or a similar product to a suburban area, to a less developed area, to a suburban city that may have infill lots within its sort of old town site, old city road grid. And we see quite a bit of that. And, developers perhaps that don't have experience with that may need some residential intelligence. Residentals, we call it, right? Cities that don't have experience with that may need the same. Right? This is what we do here at CDS and what we track when a lot of our projects, the discussion of the missing middle housing. Some developers have experience with it, some don't, but it's going to become necessary due to demographic transition, due to demand.
And one other point I want to make about these, we've used the term infill in some of these smaller sites, smaller lots. You can also use these for various types of rental housing products as well. If you're doing something on an infill site, that means you generally need to put in less new infrastructure, utilities, streets, etc. That saves money as well. And another factor that has contributed to the cost of housing is just the cost of getting it built has gone up a whole bunch in the last 10 years. Materials, labor, permitting, all that kind of stuff has really raised the cost of housing. And infill is one great way to try to address that, because then you're taking out a major step or chunk of that cost by being able to take advantage of existing infrastructure and not have to incur that cost that would have to be recouped through the cost of selling the lot or through the rents in those housing units. Well, we want to thank you for joining us for this topic. Our next video is also going to talk more about housing, obtainability, affordability, new types of products, but more from the municipal and regulatory perspective, and we hope you join us then.